Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. North Korea is once again raising tensions, both through its weapons programs and its strategic moves. A senior U.S. defense official has now warned that Pyongyang's ICBMs can reach the U.S. mainland, renewing focus on advanced missile defense systems like the so-called Golden Dome. At the same time, North Korea continues to push ahead with its nuclear and missile development, even as debate grows over whether denuclearization is still a realistic goal. Meanwhile, Pyongyang is moving closer to Moscow, marking its military involvement in Russia with a new memorial underscoring deepening ties between the two countries. And with potential diplomatic shifts and regional alignments in play, questions are mounting over what North Korea's next move could be. So how should we read these signals, and where is the Korean peninsula headed from here? For answers to this, we are here joined in the studio by Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A very big welcome, Dr. Go.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Dr. Edward Howell, lecturer on the International Relations at the University of Oxford. Good to see you, Dr. Howard.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very good to be here.
So let's start a discussion right away. First with Dr. Go. Let's start with the highlighted statement of the U.S. official on North Korea's ICBM ability to strike the U.S. mainland. And that person stressed the need for systems like the Golden Dome. What is behind this, and what does this actually mean for the security on the peninsula?
Well, I don't think this remarks is coming out of blue. It's been, or in fact, mentioned before since last year. United States has been assessing the threat coming from North Korea, and that was in fact published in this year's National Defense Strategy from the Department of War. And there, the United States government shared its honest assessment of the level of threat that North Korea represents to the security of the United States. And in fact, for the first time, the United States has qualified North Korea's ICBM capability as an existential threat to the United States homeland. So in that sense, I think it's only natural for the U.S. government official to say that the North Korea's ICBM capability is real. It's very threatening. Therefore, missile defense systems such as the Golden Dome is necessary. In fact, you can read this statement as a way to rationalize the major expenditure that the U.S. government is preparing to build this Golden Dome system. I think the cost outlay just for this year is $24 billion. So, I mean, the United States government, the Trump administration, really has to have a good explanation why it's now investing in this missile defense system that's not only designed to protect the U.S. homeland from Russian and Chinese, but also from North Korea. So I think, and in contrast to Russia and China, North Korea's ICBM threat is in a way more threatening because it's unstable. Also, unlike China and China and Russia, North Korea is not engaged with the United States in back-channel dialogue to avoid accidental escalation. So I think this is a more reason or more justification for the Trump administration to justify the construction of this rather controversial missile defense system.
So the level of uncertainty kind of raises the stakes
Exactly.
as well. Now, when we look at the broader picture, Dr. Howell, as the government sticks to this phased denuclearization approach, North Korea keeps advancing its nuclear and missile programs day by day. Do you think this approach is still workable?
Thank you. Well, we've got to remind ourselves that a phased denuclearization approach vis-a-vis North Korea is nothing new. It has happened for decades. We've seen it in various iterations across US administrations and across the progressive conservative division in South Korea, across administrations. I mean, the joint statement on the 19th of September 2005 at the six-party talks used the language of commitment, action for action, trying to denuclearize North Korea in a phased manner. And then we all know what happened afterwards. North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in October 2006. So now, over 20 years later, the situation has clearly worsened. And I think that we need to be realistic about just whether North Korea is willing to commit to such a phased approach. In the case of the current Lee Jae-myung government in Seoul, even before Lee Jae-myung made this announcement about the end strategy with respect to a phased North Korean denuclearization, Pyongyang said that it would not accept it. It was part of what Pyongyang called an appeasement offensive on the part of South Korea. And I think the key turning point here was in late 2023, early 2024, when North Korea ruled out the reunification of the Korean Peninsula under its own control as a policy goal. So we're seeing a shift in dynamics between North and South Korea, initiated by North Korea. And I think this is only another factor that makes this phased denuclearization even less likely to take place. That is not to say, however, that the US and South Korea should abandon denuclearization as a goal.
So, but the situation for this phased approach is getting more and more difficult.
Yes, indeed. It's getting more and more difficult, and it's getting harder because North Korea is only getting further away from the pursuit of denuclearization. Recent statements by Kim Jong-un at the Ninth Party Congress, for instance, made clear how in his view North Korea is a nuclear-armed state and wants to be treated as such.
Right, and of course, North Korea's ties with Russia, it's also playing a big role into this current situation. In fact, North Korea marked the anniversary of what it calls this liberation of Kursk with a memorial of troops sent to Russia. What message do you think is Pyongyang sending here?
Well, there are two messages here. So one is internal. Clearly, Kim Jong-un wants to show to the people of North Korea that there's been a major sacrifice done by the North Korean soldiers in the service of the regime. And that's why he's commemorizing with the major monument to the death of the soldiers who fought alongside the Russians in Kursk region. But also sort of a message to the Russians that it's a political signifier for the regime. And whenever the Russian dignitaries come to Pyongyang for a visit, this spot is going to be a must site for the Russian officials to pay a visit to, because this is going to be a way for the North Koreans and the Russians to reaffirm their firm bond over the fight against Ukraine. So there are these kind of two messages, but also there's a self-serving message in between the lines here. So Kim Jong-un clearly deems his intervention in Kursk for the Russians as a major achievement for the regime. Otherwise, he would not publicize this, because the scale of the death by the North Korean soldiers in the Kursk battleground has been pretty tremendous. With the revealing of this monument for the first time, we have a confirmation of how many deaths the North Korean military suffered in Russia, and it's in the order of about 2,200. So that's a major death ratio, given that it's believed that North Koreans, or the number of North Korean soldiers who've been sent to Russia has been around 10,000. So it's a 22% casualty rate, which is tremendous in the modern warfare. But then at the same time, despite the scale of deaths, clearly Kim Jong-un thinks that this has been a strategic success for North Korea, because with this intervention, North Korea has been able to stand shoulder to shoulder with major powers such as Russia and China, as evidenced by last year's Victory Day parade in Beijing in September, where Kim Jong-un was standing alongside Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping at the podium. So the major sacrifice paid by the North Korean military and North Korea's young men was well worth it. And this is the only reason why Kim Jong-un is making this into a major piece in his propaganda machine.
Right, so this commemoration, it really kind of reinforced the strengthened relationship between the two. Now, staying on that, Dr. Howell, reports say Russia, it's really getting ready to formalize a long-term military cooperation plan with North Korea. How far do you think this kind of partnership between the two could go?
Thank you. I mean, we had the visit of Belousov, the Russian defense minister, to Pyongyang only a couple of days ago, making this announcement, and still in the early stages with respect to what precisely this would involve. What we can say, and I agree with Dr. Goh's points here with respect to the domestic and international signalling on the part of North Korea, what we can say is that if we go back to the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty signed on the 19th of June 2024, we expect to see growing economic, political and security cooperation between North Korea and Russia, particularly in terms of the exchange of materials. If the Ukraine war continues, North Korea will look to continue to supply munitions to Russia, and in return gain missile and military technology about which we don't know very much at the moment. But I think it's safe to say that any second-tier Russian technology that North Korea obtains will be far superior to the Soviet legacy systems that North Korea has. I'm talking about, say, reconnaissance satellites, just as one example. I mean, there are lots of other forms of technology that we're seeing here. And I think on this point, what this announcement with respect to the military cooperation up until 2031 that Belousov made highlights is that actually the North Korea-Russia relationship might change even if the Ukraine war ends, but it's here to stay. And I think this is a very important point. It's a point that I make in my forthcoming book, A New Axis of Upheaval, in which we see that actually North Korea and Russia might have started out as a transaction, but it's moving to a much more longer-term relationship. And this was already outlined in the 2024 treaty. So I think we look to see heightened cooperation in the security domain, but also we must also look beyond the security domain. Areas such as artificial intelligence, information technology, research and development, amongst others.
Right, definitely. And when we look beyond just the North Korea and Russia ties, their cooperation with China, of course, is also seen as increasingly large, and also with Iran, of course. How should the U.S., South Korea, and their allies respond to this axis?
Well, I think the United States, South Korea, and other allies and partners are already acting on this. Clearly, there are some disagreements over how strong the ties are between the countries of the axis of upheaval, as Dr. Howell well described. And also, we know that some of these countries are very self-interested and paranoid about others. There's not clearly like a strong trust between China and North Korea, but then there's also historical ties and relational convenience that are reinforcing the ties between these two countries. And Iran is right now under huge, tremendous pressure from the United States, so it's unable to contribute so much to the strengthening of these ties with China, Russia, and North Korea. So I think the centerpiece here is really the central axis in this so-called axis of upheaval. I would say it's the tie between Russia and North Korea. I think this is a fundamental development, and the axis of upheaval, because China has a little bit of differences from Russia and North Korea in the sense that China still sees interest in maintaining some aspects of the international order, the rule-based order, especially in the economic domain, because it's convenient for the country. But then not so much with Russia and North Korea. And this is a major concern for a country like the United States, South Korea, and Japan especially. Because I think going back to the first question on the necessity for a missile defense system such as Golden Dome, is because I think the United States is concerned that Russia and North Korea are not only like cooperating on the conventional domain, such as the battleground in Kursk, or exchanging military technologies for the conventional weapons, but there's a growing possibility that Russia and North Korea might share strategic technologies. And North Korea has hinted at this by revealing a nuclear power submarine, which is in development, hopefully, remains in development, hopefully, and last year's Christmas Eve, which the only source of technology that could be is probably from Russia, even though maybe it's a second-tier technology that Russia had developed a long time ago. Nonetheless, it's a technology that North Korea didn't have before. So I think the North Korea is presenting a renewed threat profile that the United States, South Korea, and Japan hadn't seen before, and that's only thanks to each growing ties with Russia. So I think when it comes to the so-called axis of upheaval or CRINC, I think we should pay special attention to the development of ties between Moscow and Pyongyang.
More focus on there. But when we turn to what's ahead, they're saying that Kim Jong-un could visit Russia around Victory Day on May 9th. Dr. Howell, if that actually happens ahead of the U.S.-China summit, what kind of impact could it have on the region?
I think firstly, in terms of the United States, this would really put Trump and Xi Jinping into a situation in which Trump would be forced to bring up the issue of North Korea, if expected, if he doesn't bring it up already, as he will most likely do. We saw the visit of and the meeting between Wang Yi and Kim Jong-un only recently, in which China and North Korea reaffirmed their ties. I think a possible visit of Kim Jong-un to Russia, again, we cannot rule it out, will actually make China seek to perhaps say to the US, well, how do we try and maintain stability in the region? We've got to remember that China's main priority is stability with respect to the Korean Peninsula. China has been very quiet and revealed little about its own views on the North Korea-Russia relationship. This, to me, is a very deliberate strategy on the part of Beijing. We know that Beijing is still helping Pyongyang in sanctions evasion. Beijing is still supplying dual-use technologies to Moscow as a core enabler of Russia's war. Again, Beijing's role in all of this will likely feature in any discussions between President Trump and Xi Jinping. And I think that we need to remember that the broader purpose, as Dr. Go mentioned, of this important alliance, and Russia does call it an alliance now between Russia and North Korea, is to undermine the US's leadership of the post-war international order and the US's alliances. And this will likely force Donald Trump, who himself has been trying to grapple with questions of the US's own alliances in East Asia, to talk to Xi Jinping about this network of alliances, particularly the US, South Korea, and the US, Japan. And this will be something that's very important to watch out for.
Right, the context and the timing as well, it would be definitely significant. Now, when we turn internally into North Korea, Dr. Go, Kim Jong-un recently stressed ideology, lineage, and roots in a military event. Why do you think he's emphasizing these kinds of messages?
So, first of all, we have to explain what North Korea's People's Revolutionary Army is. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's not the army that still exists. It's in fact, it's deemed to be the precursor to the Korean People's Army that exists now. The Korean People's Revolutionary Army essentially refers to the band of guerrillas that fought against the Japanese under the leadership of the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, in the early 1900s. So in that sense, it's more of a mythical, symbolic commemoration, because it's also clear whether North Korea's People's Revolutionary Army ever existed. Maybe existed under a different name, but then it's more of an apocryphal kind of a description of the guerrilla fighters that Kim Il-sung led against Japanese imperialism, and especially in the Manchuria region. So the reason why I think Kim Jong-un is mentioning the lineage and roots, given the context, is because I believe Kim Jong-un is trying to institutionalize the myth that primarily surrounds him and his lineage, that starts from his grandfather, the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, but tie more to the history, the now long history of North Korea's military. Even though a lot of experts believe the origin of the North Korea's People's Revolutionary Army is fictitious, it's part of the propaganda campaign, the long-standing propaganda campaign by the regime. Nonetheless, it imbues the North Korean military with a symbolic background that ties the present posture or struggle against the United States and its allies to the glorified past of struggle against the Japanese imperialism. So I think that's what Kim Jong-un is referring to when he uses a term such as lineage and root.
Now, when we kind of look ahead, there's speculation that U.S. President Donald Trump, he could turn to North Korea as his next diplomatic focus. Dr. Howell, could summit diplomacy be used for domestic politics ahead of the midterms?
So this is the million-dollar question, so to speak, and this comes at a very important time. Just to go back to one of the previous questions, we're now seeing not just individual threats from North Korea, Russia, China, or Iran, of course, and we're seeing a collective common threat. That makes it even more complicated for the United States, because the United States now has not just these actors individually trying to target the US, but a broad collective. In that respect, therefore, we need to remember that things have changed also for this idea of US DPRK diplomacy. Under the first Trump administration, it very much was diplomacy between the US and North Korea. Under the second Trump administration, I very much think it's very much Trump-Kim diplomacy between the two leaders themselves, rather than broader coalitions within, at least in the US government. Now, is this likely to happen, and what might this mean? I think we cannot rule it out, but we must remember Trump tried to meet Kim Jong-un, at least from the reports that we saw last October 2025, during his tour of East Asia at the time of the APEC summit, and a meeting did not materialize. I think that we need to remind ourselves of two possibilities. First, Kim Jong-un is at his most emboldened now, in my view. He wants to consolidate power. He wants to leave his legacy on North Korea. He wants North Korea to be a nuclear-armed state, as he always has done. He now has Russia's support, so quite plausibly he could deny Trump a meeting. But secondly, knowing he has all of these things, he could plausibly meet Trump and give no concessions and try and get some kind of, albeit tacit, implicit acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear-armed state, and that would be a victory for Kim Jong-un. For Trump, however, does this carry domestic value? I think if Trump can try and shift the narrative and say, okay, Venezuela is over, Iran is over, Iran has won. The US has won over Iran, as he mentioned in his speech earlier, a few hours ago, in front of King Charles III of the UK. He could shift the narrative on North Korea. The question is, though, that the US is still prioritizing China, at least deterring China economically, over North Korea. And we wait to see whether that shift towards North Korea as a priority and how that evolves.
Right, so we'll have to see how this individual diplomacy between President Trump and Kim Jong-un would evolve in the coming months. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Howell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And of course, Dr. Go, we really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.